The Trump administration just dropped a bombshell on Colorado's wolf reintroduction program, and it's causing chaos across the Rocky Mountains. In a move that has conservationists calling foul and rural communities cheering, federal wildlife officials have ordered Colorado to immediately stop importing gray wolves from Canada. This decision reflects a growing pattern we've seen before. When someone proposes what seems like a protective measure for local interests, it often looks patriotic on the surface. But throughout history, such restrictions have led to unintended consequences, market disruptions, and ultimately, situations where millions of people lose their jobs. Colorado has been steadily building one of the most ambitious wolf restoration programs in the United States. Since 2023, the state has been releasing gray wolves west of the Continental Divide, following a narrow voter approval in 2020 that made Colorado the first state to mandate wolf reintroduction through a ballot initiative. About 30 wolves now roam the mountainous regions of Colorado, with the state's management plan envisioning potentially 200 or more wolves in the long term. But this program has been anything but smooth sailing. The wolf releases have been deeply unpopular in rural areas, where ranchers have reported livestock attacks and economic losses. These rural communities, many of which voted against the original ballot measure, have been vocal opponents of the program from day one. Now, following 2 winters of releases during President Biden's administration, these wolf opponents appear to have found a powerful ally in the Trump administration. The directive came in the form of a letter from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Brian Nesvik to Colorado Parks and Wildlife Director Jeff Davis.
The U.S. trade war with Canada. He is ending all negotiations over tariffs in a surprise move late last night because of this ad, which Ontario paid for to run on U.S. television.
But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Using an address from Ronald Reagan, that's some of the ad that triggered Trump's rage. And he now appears to be flipping over the table on trade talks a little over 2 weeks after what appeared to be a cordial meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Donald Trump at the White House. It's unclear right now if Carney had any warning of this. As we've been reporting, the 2 leaders have been texting and talking on the phone throughout what has been a grinding negotiation process. Chris Reyes is covering the U.S. story for us and leads off our coverage. So this decision late last night, Chris, it was after 11 p.m. Eastern, apparently out of the blue, and he's saying more this morning again on his social media platform. What is the latest?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on the money describing President Trump's reaction. And it really all started, Heather, with the Ronald Reagan Foundation coming out last night, taking issue with Ontario's ad using audio from President Reagan's speech from 1987 in which he praises fair trade and clearly makes a case against tariffs, saying that it hurts American workers and shrinks markets. That ad started running about a week ago on all of the big U.S. networks. The foundation posted on social media that this ad misrepresents the speech, that the Ontario government didn't ask or get permission to use it, and that they're considering legal action. And that is when the reaction came from President Trump. Just a few hours later after that post, President Trump used that reason to abruptly end all trade talks with Canada. On Truth Social, he called Ontario's ad fake, called Canada's actions egregious, and then accused Canada of trying to interfere with the Supreme Court and other courts which are considering challenges to Trump's tariffs. And he has posted again this morning, Heather, sounding very angry, full of accusations. On Truth Social, he posted, "Canada cheated and got caught. They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs when actually he loved tariffs for our country," Trump writes. He said that he loved that tariffs for the U.S.'s national security. Trump again accused Canada of trying to illegally.
The message was crystal clear and uncompromising. Colorado wolves must come from northern Rockies states, not from international sources. Nesvik's letter ordered Colorado to cease and desist any and all efforts related to the capture, transport, and release of gray wolves not obtained from northern Rocky Mountain states. This represents a dramatic shift in federal policy and throws Colorado's carefully planned winter releases into complete disarray. The state had already signed an agreement with the British Columbia Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship to relocate 10 to 15 wolves this winter, an agreement that was finalized before they received Nesvik's October 10th letter. Colorado Parks and Wildlife spokesperson Luke Perkins confirmed that the state is now scrambling to evaluate all options to support this year's gray wolf releases after receiving this unexpected federal guidance. The timing of this federal intervention couldn't be more problematic for Colorado's program. Though some of the state's reintroduced wolves have come from Oregon, the most recent releases have relied heavily on wolves from British Columbia. This Canadian source has been crucial because it provides access to genetically suitable wolves that are already adapted to similar mountainous terrain and climate conditions. But here's where the Trump administration's directive creates a massive logistical nightmare. Most of the preferred U.S. Rocky Mountain states don't want to participate in Colorado's reintroduction effort. Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, the Yellowstone region states where wolves from Canada were successfully reintroduced in the 1990s, have all said they don't want to be part of Colorado's program. This resistance stems from their own complex relationships with wolf management and concerns about reducing their own wolf populations. This creates what wildlife experts are calling an impossible situation. Colorado needs wolves to fulfill its voter-mandated program and maintain genetic diversity in its growing population. But the Trump administration is blocking access to the most readily available and suitable source, Canadian wolves, while the preferred U.S. sources are unwilling to cooperate. It's a classic bureaucratic catch-22 that threatens to derail the entire program. The legal and policy foundations of this dispute reveal just how contentious wolf management has become. The core issue centers on whether the federal agency actually required that wolves must only come from northern U.S. Rocky Mountain states when it designated Colorado's experimental population of reintroduced wolves. A federal notice announcing this designation in 2023 referred to the Northern Rockies region as merely the preferred and not the required source of wolves. This distinction between preferred and required has become the central battleground. Defenders of Wildlife attorney Lisa Salzberg has accused the Fish and Wildlife Service of twisting language by saying wolves can't come from Canada or Alaska. According to Salzberg, the original federal designation never actually prohibited international sources, making the Trump administration's new interpretation a significant departure from established policy. The scientific implications of this policy shift extend far beyond bureaucratic procedures. Wolf reintroduction programs depend on genetic diversity to ensure long-term population health and viability. Limiting source populations to only U.S. Rocky Mountain states, especially when those states are reluctant participants, could severely compromise the genetic foundation of Colorado's wolf population. Canadian wolves offer broader genetic diversity and have proven highly successful in previous reintroduction efforts. Moreover, the ecological argument for Canadian wolves is compelling. The wolves from British Columbia come from ecosystems that closely mirror Colorado's mountainous terrain, climate patterns, and prey species. These wolves are already adapted to similar environmental conditions, making them ideal candidates for successful establishment in Colorado's wilderness areas. Restricting sources to potentially unwilling U.S. states could be forcing Colorado to accept wolves from less suitable habitats or face significant delays in population building.
Yeah, Canada has navigated this nightmare before and got through it, was able to sort of get things back on track, but it did deliver a massive blow to momentum that seemed to be building in the summer. And now Canada is finding itself once again in this very difficult spot. What I've been told previously by senior Canadian government sources is whatever we're hearing publicly, it's likely way worse behind the scenes. That is what has been this sort of pattern in the past when it comes to these kinds of big threats and these big blow-ups. The last time Donald Trump was this angry at Canada, it had to do with when Canada was about to impose its digital services tax. Canadians will remember he put a note out on Truth Social, seemingly without much heads up or warning, that he was again going to halt those trade talks because he was angry about that policy. What we saw at the time then Canada eventually decided to late night issue a statement on social media just before the actual tax was supposed to kick in, announced that Canada was not going to impose that tax. And it took some time for Canadian officials to sort of gear things up and get things moving again after some momentum had been building.
History has shown us that when governments make such restrictions, claiming to protect local interests, the situation often becomes way worse behind the scenes than what appears publicly. Similar crises have occurred before in wildlife management, where late-night concessions and emergency negotiations become necessary to get conservation programs back on track. The political dynamics surrounding this decision reveal the deep divisions that continue to defy any American wildlife policy. Rural Colorado communities, particularly ranchers and agricultural interests, have consistently opposed wolf reintroduction due to concerns about livestock predation and economic impacts. These communities see the Trump administration's directive as validation of their concerns and a long overdue federal intervention to slow or halt what they view as an imposed urban environmental agenda. On the other side, conservation groups and urban Colorado voters who supported the original ballot initiative view this federal interference as an attempt to undermine democratically expressed conservation priorities. They argue that Colorado voters made a clear choice in 2020, and federal agencies should support rather than obstruct state-led conservation efforts. Governor Jared Polis's administration is now caught in the middle of this federal-state conflict. Spokesperson Shelby Weeman confirmed that the governor's office and Colorado Parks and Wildlife are in direct communication with the Interior Department, working to find solutions that would allow wolf releases to continue this year. However, the options appear limited given the federal directive and the reluctance of preferred U.S. source states. The broader implications of this conflict extend well beyond Colorado's borders. Wolf reintroduction and management have become flashpoint issues across the American West, with states taking dramatically different approaches based on their political climates and stakeholder pressures. The Trump administration's intervention in Colorado could signal a broader federal policy shift that affects wolf management decisions in other states. This situation also highlights the complex interplay between federal and state authority in wildlife management. While states typically have primary responsibility for wildlife within their borders, federal agencies maintain oversight for species listed under the Endangered Species Act and experimental populations. The tension between these jurisdictions creates opportunities for political interference that can disrupt science-based conservation programs. The economic stakes of this dispute are substantial. Colorado's wolf program represents a significant financial investment in wildlife restoration, habitat management, and conflict mitigation programs. Delays or restrictions could waste millions of dollars in planning and preparation while potentially requiring expensive program redesigns. Rural communities also face economic uncertainties as they adapt to the presence of wolves and implement livestock protection measures. Looking ahead, this conflict could reshape how wolf reintroduction programs are structured and implemented across the United States. If the Trump administration's interpretation prevails, future programs may face similar restrictions on source populations, potentially limiting the success and genetic viability of reintroduced wolf populations. Alternatively, legal challenges to this interpretation could clarify federal authority and establish precedents for future conservation efforts. The international dimension of this dispute also raises questions about cross-border wildlife cooperation. Canada and the United States have a long history of collaborative wildlife management, including the successful Yellowstone wolf reintroduction that used Canadian wolves. The Trump administration's directive could strain these relationships and complicate future international conservation partnerships. For Colorado's existing wolf population, the immediate impacts of this policy shift remain uncertain. The 30 wolves currently roaming the state represent the foundation of what was planned to be a much larger population. Without continued releases to maintain genetic diversity and population growth, these wolves face increased risks from inbreeding, demographic stochasticity, and environmental pressures. The scientific community is watching this situation closely, as it could provide important lessons about the intersection of politics and conservation biology. The success or failure of Colorado's program under these new constraints will influence how future reintroduction efforts are designed and implemented. As winter approaches, Colorado wildlife officials are racing against time to find solutions that satisfy federal requirements while maintaining their conservation objectives. The state's evaluation of all options likely includes renewed outreach to reluctant Rocky Mountain states, potential legal challenges to the federal interpretation, and contingency planning for delayed or modified release schedules. This developing situation represents more than just a policy dispute. It's a test case for how conservation programs navigate political transitions and federal oversight. The outcome will determine not only the future of wolves in Colorado, but also the broader trajectory of wildlife restoration efforts across the American West. The Trump administration's directive has created a conservation crisis that pits federal authority against state initiatives, rural concerns against urban priorities, and political considerations against scientific recommendations. As this conflict unfolds, it will reveal fundamental tensions in American wildlife policy and determine whether collaborative conservation can survive in an increasingly polarized political environment. The wolves of Colorado have become symbols in a much larger battle over the future of wildlife management in America.